the next hour, you're listening to the Classic Auto Mall podcast, broadcast from the Classic Auto Mall studio in Morgantown, Pennsylvania. Classic Auto Mall is a world-class facility conveniently located just an hour west of Philadelphia on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. The building is over 336,000 square feet and is full of over 650 classics for sale and 300 barn finds on display. Check out all the inventory on the website, classicautomall.com. If you have any questions for our host or guest, email us at podcast@classicautomall.com. Now on to the show with our host, the president of Classic Auto Mall, Stewart Howden.
Good morning, Steve, and good morning, listeners. Glad to have you here at the Classic Auto Mall podcast this fine Saturday morning. This is show number 12. So we've got 12 in the books. 11 in the books, and hopefully 12 in the books if we can figure out our technical difficulties. Sorry for any of that. And we've had an amazing week. The consignments just keep rolling in. It's just phenomenal. We've got we're at 984 consignments for the year, and that's I just can't believe how many that we're getting in on a weekly basis. And when you think back to where we started 2018, we were taking in probably 2 or 3 consignments every week. Maybe we were that busy. Maybe we weren't. So taking in all these consignments, what is the process? So we bring them in. We do photographs of the car. We put them up on the lift and do undercarriage photographs. We write a full description on the car. We do all of these things, and they take time. So we sometimes get a little behind, which we are now. And then our lift broke this week, where we take the undercarriage pictures. So we popped a pulley or a cord or a cable or something. So all of a sudden, we're without a lift. So it slowed us down a little bit, but hey, we're resilient, and we figure out ways to, there's more than one way to skin a cat, as they like to say. And we're able to figure that out. So let's get on with the show. First of all, I want to give a shout out to my buddies down in Punta Gorda, Florida with Premier Auction Group. They have an auction today, a classic car auction down on the west coast of Florida. They have over 400 cars on consignment. The auction was yesterday and today. If you go to their website, premierauctiongroup.com, Premier auctiongroup.com, you'll be able to watch the auction live, I think, starting about 9:45 a.m. Eastern Time, and then rolling on for the rest of the day till about 4 o'clock or so. So if you get a chance, you can check that out online after you listen to our complete show till 10 o'clock, and then you can go catch them. And check them out. They've got some great cars. And if you're down in that area, sneak on over to Punta Gorda. It's a beautiful part of the world, and they put on a great auction. They've been doing it for about 5 or 6 years. I think they do 2 a year. And very, very well put on and successful auction. Some of the new consignments that we've gotten in this week, Steve was just pointing out, we got an interesting one that I didn't have on my list, the 2006 SRT8 Magnum Wagon. How cool are those? You know, those are
super rare.
Super rare. You don't see them hardly anymore. I mean, you didn't see a lot of them to begin with, but this one's got 43,000 original miles on it, and it's been well maintained. It's, of course, black, which is a great color for those. I mean, that's the right color, right?
And it's got upgraded wheels, which are beautiful.
Yeah, they really are, which is not always the case, in my opinion. A lot of times they you get these cars and somebody puts a different kind of wheel on there or whatever, and it looks better or it looks worse. This particular case, it looks much better. Sometimes the stock wheels, though, are pretty cool. I mean, they've made some really cool wheels over the years. So that's one of the new inventory that's come in here recently. We also got a 10th anniversary 79 Pontiac Trans Am.
Nice.
Nice. So, the prices on those have gone up just a smidgen.
I told you I sold mine for $1,600, and it was stock with 66,000 miles. Right. $1,600.
Yeah, $1,600. Wow. So you could count that out and, you could have that in your wallet, right? I mean, that would be enough.
No.
You could keep $1,600 in your wallet,
yes.
Right? If it's all $100 bills, not if it's 20s or 10s and 5s and 1s.
It's not much money, and it probably didn't really make a difference when I bought the Grand National, right. But I'm kicking myself for 30 years.
For selling it at that price point. I think I bought my Trans Am. My first Trans Am was, I think, $4,200 or something in 1978 or 77 or whatever year it was that we had that car. But this one's a 79 Trans Am. It's silver, of course, as all the anniversary ones were. It's got 17,000 actual miles on it. So now it does have the Olds 403, not the 400 that would have been the most desirable engine of the era. And, of course, in 79 was the last year you could get the 400. And also the last year for a 4-speed, or at least the last year for some period of time for a manual transmission, I should say, instead of 4-speed. Because 4-speed nowadays doesn't mean the same thing. No. You say 4-speed to the kids, and they say, well, that could be an automatic, or that could be, Right. I mean, my new truck is a 10-speed.
Wow.
And that you would think was a bicycle, So back in the days, a 10-speed was a bicycle. 4-speed was a 400, a 4 on the floor. An automatic was a 3-speed usually. Most of the turbo-hydromatic 300s or the turbo-hydromatic 400s were all 4-speed or 3-speed automatics. So, and nowadays with the fuel mileage and all that, they have a gear for every RPM, I guess. So
we've come a long way.
Maybe too far.
What's next? 20 gears?
I don't know. And of course, the feature that I hate the most, and there's a segment I want to do at the end of the show today about things that we're very grateful in that are in cars these days, such as my wife will tell you, heated seats and cup holders and remote locks and stuff like that she loves. And I get it. I understand that. Heated seats are addictive. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. They are really addictive. I mean, it could be summertime and I think, well, I could turn that heated seat on, So anyway, I digress from that. We just got in a 59 Impala, which we hadn't gotten many of those in. Those are kind of interesting cars. 58 was a 1-year only body style for Impala. So you went from 55, 6, and 7, the Bel Airs and all that. Then the 58 was a 1-year only body style. So imagine the tooling and the cost to build a car for 1 year. Of course, I don't think they sold as many of them as the Tri-5s, but then the 59s came out and they were completely different. They had the really cool tail end. And we've got one that just came in. It's in a shade of green that I don't think I've ever seen. I'm not sure that it's factory. It's called, I don't know what it's called. Well, they call it the Jolly Green Giants. I don't think that was the actual code name for it from the factory. Although, Mopar had some interesting color names back in the day. So, but anyway, it's a 59 Impala, 2-door hardtop. Really a neat looking car. And like I said, we just don't get many of those. We also got a really interesting barn find 1970 Corvette. Ls5 454, red, 4-speed manual trans, all numbers matching, so says the consigner. It's got the T-tops, and the paint is barn find condition. It's, it's got some chips and cracks and checks and all that good stuff in it, but it's really a cool car because it was found in North Carolina, and the gentleman who found it just bought it and thought, oh, it's the conundrum. What do? You find this car in barn find condition. Your thought is, I want to make it pretty and nice and shiny, so I want to paint it. But the value sometimes can be in barn finds. I mean, we see at auctions and here at Classic Auto Mall where barn finds sell for close to what a restored one does. And I don't quite understand the logic, although mine is not to question why. All I am is to present them here, and if you like to buy it and you want to pay whatever it is for that, then go for it. So that's your choice. That's what's amazing about this hobby is that you can do what you want. Although the purist might get on to you if you do certain things, but it's like playing blackjack at a casino. The guy says next to you, "That was my card," or
right.
No, it didn't. That was my card. I had a gut feeling. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. Doesn't matter if the book says don't hit on 12 or whatever the rule is. I don't know much about that stuff. Although we've got a casino coming across the corner from us, so
sure do.
I guess I better learn about that stuff if I want to go over there and act like know what I'm doing over there.
Right.
We also got a 69 Yenko Camaro clone with a 454 in it as well, and it's really nicely done. It's triple black, not a convertible. It's got a black vinyl top and black interior and black exterior paint, and the 454 with a 3-speed automatic. So. All the purists. You got to have a 4. No, you know what? You got whatever's enjoyable for you. I say it. Look, if it makes you happy, then that's all that counts. And if you like an automatic transmission over a manual, I can't hardly blame you because if you're in a parade in a 4-speed manual, it's a miserable thing. I'm sorry. It's one of those things that at the end of the day, comfort. Trumps a lot of things when you get to be my age. As you get older, you realize that, I'd like to be a little more comfortable, and hence the heated seats and cup holders and all that good stuff. So another one we got in was a 1934 Ford 1.5-ton flatbed truck, a Model BB. And those are really cool, and it's got the offie heads, and it's got the open engine compartment, and it's black, and it's cool, and it's just one of those fantastic trucks that you hardly see anymore. And we've got to take a break, but when we return, we're going to talk to our special guest today, Harry Hurst, who's a well-known photographer and writer and involved with a lot of different things automotive, and he's local to the area during the good season. I think he goes to Florida when the season shifts, which I don't blame him and I'm jealous of because I'm complaining about how cold it is. But when we return, we'll have Harry here in the studio, and we'll talk some car stuff. And we are back with the Classic Auto Mall podcast live from the Classic Auto Mall studios, and beautiful and sunny today, downtown Morgantown, Pennsylvania, with a special guest in the studio this morning, noted author, photographer, all-around car guy, Mr. Harry Hurst. Harry, good morning. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, we met a 3 weeks ago with mutual friends, or a month ago, or I don't know, longer. It's time seems to go weirdly fast, and the older we get. I told my son one time, I said, it's amazing how fast a month goes, and he said, I didn't understand what you meant until I started having to pay rent. That certainly does it. So my first question is the most important question I'll ask you all day. All right. Any relationship to the shifter?
No. It is funny you mentioned that. I grew up in Florida,
right,
and then I moved up here, and of course Hurst Industries was right over in Warminster.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and when I was shooting races in the 60s and 70s, I did have the opportunity at one time to run into Linda Vaughn.
Oh, yes.
And so I walk up. I'm a snot-nosed kid of 19, right? And I walk up, to the immortal Linda Vaughn and say, "Hi, my name is Harry Hurst. I think we might be related." And she looks right at me and says, "I don't think so."
I don't think so. I met her 3 weeks ago when I was in Chattanooga at the Concord down there, and fascinating person.
Yeah.
And, what a career she's had. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, she is. And I just recently did a book on the 1970 Road Atlanta Can-Am,
right,
with my photos, and I had photos of her in there, and
right,
I wanted to get some people's comments, and so I emailed Jennifer Revson, who
right, is
Peter Revson's sister, and said, "Hey, I understand you guys are friends. Can you give me a quote that I could use?" And it surprised me the level of admiration people have for her hard work and her intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody says, you can look at how she looks, of
sure,
course, but she is probably the most business savvy person,
right,
you will ever run into, right, in racing.
Well, and such an ambassador to racing,
yeah,
as well, too. And, that goes a long way. And like you said, just a pretty face is a pretty face. That's great, and that's wonderful. And that's all about racing, getting a kiss from the pretty girl when you win. What a wonderful thing. But, it was interesting to meet her, and she's quite the character and got a great sense of humor. And we had some good visits when we were down there in Chattanooga. So Road Atlanta sounds to me like one of your favorite tracks, and it's certainly one of my favorite because I grew up in East Tennessee, and we didn't have any road racing courses, so
right,
we had to go to Road Atlanta. And, of course, Turn 5 was our preferred spot to sit at Road Atlanta. You could see them coming down the hill up through the S and then accelerating up over the hill, and it was really amazing to watch from there. What got you started in this hobby and taking pictures and specifically Road Atlanta?
Well, I grew up in Tampa, and if you could say, the Southeast was not exactly a hotbed of road racing activity, as
right,
you mentioned. However, at that time, Florida had something that no other place in the United States had. It had a race that attracted international drivers and teams. In the 1950s, road racing was done by the SCCA that had a ban on professional racing. So none of the European drivers had any interest, frankly, in coming
sure,
over here, unless they got paid under the table.
Right.
But Sebring was sanctioned by the AAA at the time, and they got the international teams, Jaguar, Ferrari, all of that. So if you wanted to see Fangio and Moss and guys like that, you had to come to Florida.
Right.
Well, we having a house in Tampa, and you'd be surprised how many relatives, are your best friend. And we had this husband and wife that would come down every March and stay with us because they were huge Sterling Moss fans. And they would go from there to Sebring. And around the dinner table, it was, as my grandmother said, "Oh, Sterling Moss and this and that, oh, I just hate that stuff." The rest of the family hated it, but I was transfixed by it.
Sure.
And when I was 16, I would have been 14 years old. My dad was an accountant, and of course, Sebring is during the height of tax season. But he comes home Saturday around 2:00 and says, "Okay, everybody, get your coats on. We're going to Sebring." And I went, "Oh my God!"
Oh.
So we got in the car. It was 1965.
Wow.
If you remember, that was the year of the great downpour.
Oh,
it rained like
I remember
buckets.
pictures from it.
And we got in the car. We got there right after the rain stopped, and I could barely see, but I could see the Chaparrals and Ford GT40s and the cars I'd only been reading about in the magazines up until then.
Sure.
And so, then I started going with friends in 66 and 67. I became a flagman, in 69. But I didn't really like being a flagman, and they didn't particularly think I was qualified as well. But I took photographs while I did it, and they happened to get into the hands of the press officer at Sebring, John Smiley.
Right.
And he said, "Hey, would you shoot the race for me?"
Oh, my God.
And I said, "Are you kidding?" So at the age of 19, I became the track photographer at Sebring and got, on-track access.
Wow.
Back then, you didn't think of the pits as being hot.
Right.
Everybody, was, you can't believe how crude the safety requirements were.
Sure. I mean, they had safety requirements, but they certainly weren't up to today's standard.
There was close. For example, there was no speed limit on the pit lane.
Right.
So, they would blare an air horn when a car was coming in. So you had to really pay attention to what you were doing. And look up, and the cars would come in and, very fast, come to a screeching halt. They get worked on. And then, of course, all of us photographers, we're in front of the car, taking pictures and stuff. You had to be very, very aware of when the driver jumped into the car. And when the headlights came on, you better get out of the way because they did not care who was in front of them.
Sure.
And I mean, luckily nobody, I never saw anybody actually get hit. So I did hear of some, but it was dangerous. And it was only 2 lanes wide.
Right.
There was the pit lane and there was the entry and exit lane.
And the cars weren't as technologically advanced back then either. So they didn't have the great brakes or all that.
Right.
Plus, and the other thing about Sebring was it was an old airport in the middle of nowhere, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Even for Floridians, it was in the middle of nowhere.
They'd never heard of it or even had any idea.
No.
Now, luckily, you weren't a photographer in 1971 at the Indy 500 because the guy in the 71 Challenger who slid it sideways into the scaffolding.
Right into the scaffolding.
And luckily, I don't think anybody was very hurt, but hurt is hurt, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, one of the cool things, and one of the things that I learned about you here recently was this wonderful Facebook page that you have called Glory Days of Racing.
Yeah.
My goodness. The images are just, oh my God, talk about memories. How'd that get started?
Well, I had started it 5 years ago. When I first started, really concentrating on doing some of the books and selling prints and going to the races and stuff. And so I started this Facebook page, and I would occasionally put some of the photos up. But, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on it.
Right.
Well, you mentioned we have a house in Florida. So, we were down at the house in Florida last year, and COVID comes. Mm-hmm. And honestly, we didn't have anything to do. I mean, we could go out and play golf in the afternoon, but that was it.
Right.
Well, I had all of my photos with me in my scanner. I had taken it down because that was going to be my job for, that time we were there. So I started scanning these pictures, which honestly, many of them I had never looked at in 50 years.
Wow.
I had never scanned them. I'd never done anything with them. And so I started scanning them and putting them up on this Glory Days of Racing Facebook page. And since I don't have anything to do, I'm putting 3 or 4 up a day and such. And then I thought, well, I'm going to write a little narrative for each one,
Right.
you know, and so I kind of try and, you know, bring people back to that time and place. You know, here's what it was like. And, you know, here's maybe this incident like Donahue hitting Pedro Rodriguez in 1971 at Sebring, and, you know, things like that, you know, and all of a sudden it starts exploding.
Right.
And, you know, I go from 500 people to 1,000, and then 2,500, and then 5,000. And just a week ago, we passed 15,000.
Wow.
We're now, last night I looked at it, it was 15,973. And so I'm sure this morning it's over 16.
Yeah.
And we'll probably be 20,000 by the end of the year.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
You know, we found the same thing, is that you start posting things and you kind of lose track of where you are and what you've done and how many you've posted. And all of a sudden it gains traction. So when we return, we're going to talk about something that you've done here that's a little closer to home here, that involvement with the Simeon Museum, which is in downtown Philly, which is an amazing place. So when we return with Harry Hurst, we'll talk about all things automotive and maybe some things about little old Morgantown. And we are back. Oh, gosh, I sent it. I don't know where that came from. I'm learning this as we go, folks, so just bear with me. Anyway, we're having fun with it. We're talking to our buddy Harry Hurst, who's a phenomenal photographer and writer and has a couple of books out. And one of them you did, or a couple of them you did about Sebring, but the most recent one was called The 12 Hours of Sebring, 1970. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, that's the I've done an updated version of the 1970 book. Actually, that was my very first book that I first published in 2004.
Right.
And that came about. I had an advertising agency, and as you know, we kind of went through some rough times in around 2000 or so.
Yeah.
And it kind of disrupted my agency considerably. It had been extremely successful up till then. And again, I was sitting around with time on my hands, and I said, you know, I'd like to do something with these photos. I had a lot of photos of the 1970 race, which your listeners may remember is the race that Steve McQueen, with his co-driver Peter Revson, and I want to give most of the credit here to Peter Revson.
Sure.
But they almost won the race outright, driving a little Porsche 908 against the 917s and the 512s, the factory Ferraris and the Gulf Porsches.
Wow. What set them apart to be that competitive with that car?
Well, first of all, the 908 was a very strong automobile.
Sure.
I mean, it was. You know, the year before, Porsche in 1969, they had a fleet of them, and they thought they were going to win the whole thing against the Lola Chevrolets.
Right.
So, I mean, it was a pretty quick car, and despite having 2 very long runways for straightaways, Sebring is actually more conducive to slower speed cars.
Right.
So you don't need the high speed like at Le Mans and Spa, and it's rock solid, very, very reliable car. So, and it was well prepared. And then they had the luck that both the 917 and the 512 were relatively brand new cars. I mean,
not well sorted, maybe.
Yeah. So by attrition, all of a sudden, you know, in the last hour, they find themselves in the lead.
Wow.
And there was a Ferrari in second place. And the Ferrari team manager goes over to Mario Andretti, who was about ready to get into his private plane and fly back up here to Nazareth, because he had Sebring is run on a Saturday, and he had a sprint car race in Nazareth on Sunday, so he was going to fly back.
Course.
Yeah, right. And they said, "Hey, look, you know, would you get into the second place car and see if you can chase down, you know, these guys? We think you can." And so, you know, he wasn't going to do it. You know, he had no real interest in doing it. He wasn't getting paid any more for it. And but as he says, the loudspeaker guy kept saying, "Steve McQueen's in the lead. Steve McQueen's in the lead," and it pissed him off so much. I hope I can say that.
You can say that,
okay? Because it was really Peter Revson who was the reason they were in the lead, not Steve McQueen. But you know, the glamour. And so he gets in to the second place Ferrari, and as he told me, he said, "I drove like a man possessed."
Right.
And he was doing lap times at night at Sebring that were quicker than the other 2 drivers had qualified the car in the day, right? So he's eating up the time, gets down to the last 2 minutes, right? His warning light for his fuel reserve comes on, right? He knows he can't go any, he won't make it to the end. He dashes into the pits. He has to be out of the car. The Ferrari team manager grabs him by the epaulets and pulls him out of the car. They slash him gas in, gets back in, zooms out. Peter Revson's passed him again at this point, and he chases him down in the last few seconds and wins by 23 seconds.
Wow.
Now, this is a 12-hour race, and he's won by 23 seconds.
Wow.
Right?
Most of those were won by minutes and hours.
Oh,
maybe
sure.
Even.
No drama generally, at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, it was considered to be the greatest Sebring of all time.
Sure.
And I was lucky I had a really good coverage of it in my photographs. So I decided in 2004 that I was going to do a photo book. I wanted to do something cinematic in the way a storyboard would be. So you would look through the photos and the photos would tell the story. And I would do a little bit of brief introduction to it. And I made black and white Xerox copies, and I sent it around to people to look at, and I sent it to Dan Gurney, people like that, to look at. Well, one guy got back to me, and I'm drawing a blank on his name. Anyway, his advice was, what you need to get other people's recollections besides your own.
Right.
And I thought, oh, wow, that's because I didn't want to write the history of the race. That's been done.
Yeah, and kind of boring. Not boring, but done.
Yeah. And he said, you should get other people's recollections. So I sent it around. I sent it to Dan. I sent it, everybody I could think of, that I could get in touch with, including Mario. And got their recollections. And it was funny because I sent it to Mario pretty much at the very end after a lot of people's stuff was in there and the book was pretty much done. And honestly, I didn't think, I sent it, the only address I had was his fan club up there in
certainly goes right to him.
Yeah.
Then. Yeah.
And so I said, well, that's over. But I don't really care, And anyway, 2 days later, I get a phone call, I swear to God. Hi, this is Mario. There's so much goddamn wrong with this book, I don't know where to start. Like that. He's like shouting at me. He said, I was doing 2 minutes and 34 seconds, not, 2:38. I mean, he knew every detail.
Wow.
I mean, his recollection was astounding.
It's amazing what those guys remember and recall, and laps and corners and how they hit them, and like a golfer, remember every shot of a round.
Yeah,
it's pretty amazing. So he signed off on it, and gave his stamp of approval.
I mean, we spent quite a bit of time going through the whole thing, and luckily I record everything.
Right,
and so I had it all. I could get all the details. And then he was kind enough to do the foreword to the book and signed some limited editions that we had at the time. And he was very, very gracious.
Wow.
He was a wonderful guy.
How cool is that?
Yeah,
that's awesome. I mean, the people that you got to hang around with and talk to is just amazing. And so do you have, from any period or era, do you have a favorite race car?
Favorite race car? Wow. Well, of course, it would be real easy to say the Porsche 917.
Absolutely.
But and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. The thing, I saw them race, and I tell you, there's nothing more thrilling than to be at the start-finish line at Daytona at 2:00 in the morning as a Porsche 917 goes by literally feet away at 200 miles an hour, downshifting as it goes into the infield.
Yeah,
that's pretty.
That's nirvana.
That's
right
pretty
there.
amazing.
Hard to beat that.
But when I got involved with the Simeon, they of course have the Hippie 917, and I got very familiar with the construction details of the 917, and I saw why there were only a handful of drivers that would get in that car.
Just too much car for some, right?
Well, and there's no car there.
Right.
I mean, you've got, a massive 600 horsepower engine in the back and, tubular framing and very thin fiberglass, and your feet are sticking out in front of the tires in the front.
Yeah, people don't realize that 600 horsepower then with a car that weighs less than 2,000 pounds versus a 600 horsepower car that weighs 4,000 pounds is a different animal completely.
Yeah.
Yes, we have those today, but back then they were crude. They were, not very safety conscious.
Not at all.
Yeah.
In fact, I mean, it's a miracle that not more drivers got killed in that car. I mean, the Ford GT, if you talk about the iconic car of that period, I think the Ford GT is hands down the car.
Well, and what Ford did by resurrecting in the Ford GT, not GT40 in 2005, 2006 was pretty amazing. I mean, you couldn't imagine Porsche, building a 917 and making it streetable in 2005 or 2006. It just wouldn't have been something they would have done.
Yeah.
So it was interesting that Ford did that and capitalized on the heritage of it.
Well, and the thing that they introduced, and I think this is something that's overlooked, we've talked about the 917. There was no consideration given to driver safety with the 917. Sure. And this is in 1969 when it was introduced. Well, when the Ford GT was first built in 1964, it was a steel tub, not aluminum. And they did that for a number of reasons. But, one of the there was a great deal of consideration given to safety in driver safety. I think Ford Motor Company realized if we're going to be doing this for the PR value, the last thing we need is to have a driver get killed.
Sure.
And so there was a lot of consideration given. I mean, it had a 4-point harness.
Right.
And in fact, one of the very first times that a harness was installed in the car, they put roll bars in. Some of them were later retrofitted. But they really did put forth a great deal of effort to make sure that the driver was safe.
Sure.
And that then started permeating all of racing.
Right.
Then Jackie Stewart started getting really involved and saying, look, you can't have race courses with trees on the side of the road.
Doesn't make sense.
I mean, that's crazy.
Well, and if you watch stuff from the historical side of racing and all of that, especially on YouTube and also on Netflix nowadays, there seems to be a lot of racing type things, and you realize that the danger of it. And then the thing that's most amazing to me is watching the old races back in the day when a driver would have a crash and fellow drivers would stop and help him.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, the unselfishness of that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, how many of them, literally saved these guys from dying?
Yeah.
I mean, the car is on fire. I mean, Brett Lunger, who lives down in Baltimore, saved Niki Lauda.
Right.
I mean, literally, if it hadn't been for Brett, Nicky would not have survived.
And what a later career he had too with Mercedes and everything that he did, and such an amazing talent. And what's your take on the current state of racing? Do you like it? Is it hard to follow for you? Or?
Well, I mean, I'll watch the Formula One every now and then. I think it's incredible to watch the cars. Mm-hmm. I mean, the speed. I went one of the times I have shot races since the glory days was I went to the very first Indy Formula One race. What was that? 2000, I think.
2001 or 2, maybe, or somewhere in there. I was there too. And it was pretty amazing.
And I had an analog film camera,
right.
And so I'm out there, shooting the Formula One cars as they go by and stuff, and I get my film. And of course, the thing about film is you don't know what you're getting until you get home, right? And so I get home, and here I've got roll after roll of a rear tire, a front nose. I'm missing the car entirely.
Well, that's the thing that people don't realize with Formula One cars until you go to a race. It's like drag racing. How fast they can go from point A to point B. It's just, or how fast they can stop. And I get up and watch the Formula One Sunday mornings as well, too. And I enjoy that. But my favorite race, back to favorite race cars, I always liked the 935 Porsches. That was the era that I grew up in with all the crazy Whittington brothers and Danny Ungaius and Moretti and all of those guys that rode Atlanta. That was the era that I enjoyed the most. And
how about the John Greenwood Corvette?
Oh, yeah. Those were pretty
I was at Daytona 75.
Right.
And he had the Spirit of Sebring there.
How cool is that?
And and you have the Porsches going around, and then this thing comes going.
I mean, it's a monster.
God, it was.
That's what I love so much about racing that I miss is that all the cars sound different. That's the beauty of the historic races.
And you talk about modern day. I mean, I wonder, honestly. I mean, racing today, especially Formula One, is funded by the manufacturers.
Sure.
I mean, and once you lose that money, you lose Formula One.
Yeah.
Well, all of the manufacturers have announced they're not going to be making internal combustion engines.
Yeah, so they say. So we'll talk about that when we come back. We've got to take a break, but we will carry on for an unprecedented third session with Harry Hurst when we return. And we are back with the Classic Auto Mall radio show podcast live from Classic Auto Mall in Morgantown, Pennsylvania. Only live if you happen to be listening between 9 a.m., 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday morning, December the 4th, blah, blah, blah. So we are talking to Harry Hurst, and we normally just do 2 segments with our guests, but we're having so much fun talking about cars. So we're going to do a 3-hour Joe Rogan. So
and
everybody,
we may go over to the McDonald's afterwards and just sit there
and keep talking. So if you want to join us at McDonald's, we'll buy you a cup of coffee and we'll keep jibber jabbering about jibber jabbers. So we were talking about the '59 Corvette, and that led us into a bunch of other things. But what was interesting was you had a little interesting take on that as well too.
Yeah, you had talked about the that Corvette being a barn find, and and I find it rather amusing today. I go to some of the auctions and stuff, and I see these cars literally with the hay and stuff. You used to see them over at Hershey all the time,
right.
But they weren't necessarily getting a premium for those cars.
Right.
And now they're charging, as you say, as much as a restored car.
It's amazing.
Well, I had the great honor of meeting Dr. Fred Simeone back in the mid 1990s, and at that time, Fred, as many of your listeners may know, Fred was a Philadelphia neurosurgeon, probably one of the top neurosurgeons in the world.
Sure.
Certainly, he was actually voted by his peers as being the busiest physician in the United States.
Wow.
He would do 8 spinal procedures a day,
Jeez.
Every day. But that was just how he works.
Right.
That's just
his intensity and level.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, of course, he was building one of the world's greatest automotive collections, and it has been recognized now as such. But when I met him in 1995, he had his Aston Martin DBR1 out at the Philadelphia Vintage Grand Prix, and I was helping put that on. And, I looked at it and said, wow, that's a really nice replica, because
nobody had one.
Yeah, who in the world would ever think that a DBR1 is here at Philadelphia, right? Well,
Exactly.
Michael Furman,
Yes.
the great photographer,
fantastic.
was next to me, and he said, oh, no, that's not a replica. That's the real deal. And I said, oh, come on,
Right.
Michael. And he said, no, that's Fred Simeone owns that. And so I met Fred, and I started developing this relationship with him. Since I had an ad agency, he had all the cars in a nondescript 2-story garage downtown Philadelphia, and he wanted to start having people come in. So I helped him show everything. Well, the hallmark of the Simeone collection is that the cars are in as raced, unrestored condition.
They're beautiful that way too.
They're beautiful that way.
Yeah.
Well, at the time, people would look at these and they would say, well, why doesn't he clean them up? Why doesn't he paint them? It still has the chips on them and everything. Why don't you have them restored? And Fred would say, no. These are historically important automobiles, and any restoration, anything you do to alter the patina the way it is, you're detracting from it. And he uses the analogy of furniture, which
Sure.
if you have a beautiful piece of antique furniture that's worth a lot of money, you refinish it, you've destroyed its value.
Destroyed it. It's no value whatsoever.
Well, at the time, nobody adopted that philosophy.
Right. He was an outlier.
He was absolutely an outlier. Today, you have a preservation class at almost every concours in the United States.
Absolutely.
And people now, as you say, cars, have that value. And I really do give the credit entirely to Dr. Simeone, because he went through a lot of abuse from some very famous people.
Sure. Well, and if you look at even back in early 2000s, the price of a race car, like you'd see a 935 or a 917 come up for auction, and they wouldn't bring anything. Or
No.
they wouldn't even get a bid. They'd have a high reserve on them, maybe $1 million back then, or whatever the number was, and nobody would be interested.
Right.
And then, of course, the vintage racing started happening. Guys like Dr. Fred Simeone, who, by the way, if you haven't been to his place, it's amazing. It's in downtown, or I say downtown Philly. It's on Norwich Drive, actually in Philadelphia. If you go to his website, it's SimeoneMuseum.org, SIMEONE museum.org. .org and check it out. It's staggering how cool that place is.
I remember the first time I went through when it was in the garage over in close to the hospital where he had it, so he could walk over when he wasn't in surgical procedures.
Right.
And I look in and I see, oh my God, a D-Jag. A C-Jag. Oh, my heavens, a Testarossa Ferrari?
A real one.
And a Ford Mark IV? I mean, they only made 10 chassis,
right.
and only 4 of them actually raced at Le Mans in 1967, and he's got one of them.
Yeah, I mean, an amazing collection. And they're presented in just kind of period correct look, so you can easily like walk past something and then go, wait a minute, what is that?
Yeah,
that's a car, because and there's so many of them that are just so amazing, including the Cobra Daytona, which is arguably as valuable, except for maybe the Ferrari GTO, as any car out there. I mean,
well, actually, there are a couple of cars in the collection that people aren't as aware of the value because they just simply never, ever come on the market. The Ferrari GTO, I think, frankly, they made 39 GTOs.
Yeah, which is a lot.
It's a lot. Why are they bringing, the money they're bringing?
40, 50.
When the Pontoon 250 that he has, I believe they only made 19 of those.
And a prettier car, in my opinion.
And me too. I had the Strombecker slot car when I was a kid. I lusted after that car.
Yeah.
Why is that bringing more than a GT? And essentially, it's the same car underneath.
Right.
That's why that, you mentioned Daytona. The Daytona only was able to be built because Ferrari had made an exemption in the rules so that they could use the same drivetrain on the Pontoon 250, this open sports car. They could put a enclosed body on it and run it in the GT class. And they could count all the chassis that had been built before to be homologated.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what GTO stands for, Gran Turismo Omologato.
Right.
And that's the same loophole then that Carroll Shelby used to let Pete Brock build the body on the Cobra Daytona Coupe.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And that was the only, and then of course, Shelby did what he wanted to do. He went out and kicked Ferrari's ass.
Exactly.
And won the manufacturers championship in 1965.
And for those of you who don't know, homologation means that the manufacturers were required by the racing organization at the time to build a certain amount of cars. Usually it was 200 or 500 or whatever that number. Normally, I guess 500 was one. It was big on the rally cars and the race cars and all of that.
Yeah, I think in the case of the GT there, it was lower, 50 maybe or something. But still,
you had to build them. They had to all be built and certified or whatever they do.
And of course, when they did the 917 and the 512, they had to do the same thing, but only 25 chassis. But the famous photos, of the 25 917s, and of course the joke being, that the first 5 were real cars, and the other 20 were just shells sitting on chassis with wheels.
Probably so. Well, and it's like anything. There's always a way around. There's a different way to skin a cat. As they like to say in the South. But it's interesting to see you hit on something a minute ago about electric cars and all the manufacturers going to electric cars. And I'm, not completely opposed to electric cars. I think that there may be a place in our world for electric cars if people makes them feel good. But to say that everybody's going to go to that, how is that even? I don't think that's possible. And then what do you do with race cars? Are they going to be electric cars too? What's your take on any of this?
Well, on the race cars, we were kind of getting into that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've tried to watch Formula E.
Right.
And and the thing that's interesting about electric cars, they have 100% torque, at the get-go.
Yeah.
So, and the famous Jay Leno thing, where the old lady in the electric car and he's in the 427 Cobra and she blows his doors off. Well, so the performance of those cars is theoretically so far superior.
Sure.
But I sit there and I watch it it's like I turn the sound off.
I know. That's the way I feel.
Sound is so important
to
racing.
It's so important. It's like when I tell guys about cars that we have here, color and stance are very important.
Yeah.
It's those things that you don't think, oh, how important is that? It's very important. I remember I went to an IndyCar race one time and they all sounded like chainsaws when they were running. This would have been 2004 or 5 or 6 or somewhere in there. And it wasn't even any fun because the sound, the visceral part, the sound part of it wasn't great. That's what people don't realize about drag racing. People look down their nose at me when I talk about drag racing until you go to a drag race and you go, the thunder of that thing is unbelievable. And just 7 miles from here, we have one of the greatest tracks.
I went to Maple Grove for one of my clients was Intersys. They make Odyssey batteries,
right?
And I went over there and shot shot one event for them. And I'll tell you something. Honestly, I couldn't go back.
No,
it was literally, when the fuelers went off, it was like somebody had taken a hand grenade and dropped it right in front of you, and it went off.
Exactly.
I mean, and I've got AFib, or I had AFib, and I said, man, I got to get out of here. I think I'm going to go into AFib again.
Yeah, not a good thing to do when you're going racing.
Yeah.
So anyway, we didn't get to our 4 on the floor this week, but we'll try to get to it quickly here. It's our trivia contest based on cars that are actually here. And we had a winner from last week, by the way, Steve. So just so you know.
Awesome.
The winner last week was a gentleman out of Georgia, I believe, or Mustang Garage is his name, and he guessed the 1962 Studebaker Daytona Lark. This year's 4 clues for 4 on the floor. You guess which car, year, make, and model, and stock number in our inventory, and we'll send you a hat or a T-shirt. Clue number 1, X causing trouble. The letter X causing trouble. Number 2, fictional road hero. Number 3, go, go, go. And number 4, end of the same year Elvis wore leather. Oh, gosh. Okay, I like that. So, by the way, next week's guest is going to be Kendra Cook. Yeah, from the Boyertown Historic Museum. And what a delight to have Harry Hurst here today. Harry, thank you so much for being on the show. And
thank you for asking.
Let's do it again, because we've got plenty to talk about.
Hey,
I'm certain.
20 minutes down the road.
We'll be calling on you soon, I'm certain. Take it away, Steve.
We appreciate your listening to our show today, and don't forget, when you're in southeastern Pennsylvania, come visit us in person. We're open Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Wednesday is our late day, and we're here from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Saturdays we're open from 9 a.m. to noon, and we are closed on Sundays. You can reach us by telephone at 888-227-0914 or via email at info@classicautomall.com. To reach the show, email us at podcast@classicautomall.com. The Classic Auto Mall podcast is produced by Car Smarts Media. Theme song by the Pat Travers Band.